Hi guys, welcome to episode 37 of Tiger Heart Chats. It's been such a wonderful journey over the last few weeks. Again, ever since we did the podcast with Natalia, we've just had so many people getting in contact, and Natalia has been really wonderful as well, just being proactive and introducing me to some really interesting people who I really wanted to get on to the show. I've got an amazing person for you this time for this episode. She's someone who I've never actually met, but I've been reading about over the last few weeks, ever since Natalia introduced me to her. The breadth of experience that she has within this industry, the space that we work in with regards to emerging tech, it's still in its infancy. There's still so many exciting things that are happening, and it's so wonderful to meet someone that's exploring an avenue that's very unique in the space and also doing things that are very inspiring. A welcome to the stage, the XR and Neuroscience Researcher, creative coder, someone with a breadth of knowledge with lots of really cool emerging technologies, some that I haven't even used yet. So I'm really interested to speak to her. Please welcome to the stage the wonderful Esen K. Tütüncü. Is that right?
That's perfect.
Cool.
Thank you, Sanj. I'm humbled by that introduction. That's really sweet of you.
I had to do it. I mean, I was reading about you and I was like, wow, this person is doing some cool stuff. And actually today, whilst I was researching, I was just checking out your site and looking at some of the projects, and I was like, oh my God, not just from a tech perspective, but also from a creative perspective, there's some really interesting narratives, which we're obviously going to talk about, and I'm sure everyone's really excited. There's going to be some people that are listening to this right now who don't know much about you. Give us a little bit about your story, who you are and what you do.
All right. So, I like to think of my work as standing at the intersection where science meets story. So, where behavior and technology and imagination sort of collide. To kind of give a background, I studied arts in my bachelor's. I was doing documentary filmmaking. I had a weird episode of my life for like 3 years. I did long distance cycling through West Africa and Southeast Asia. And
Wow.
I would just interview people. It would be like 3, 4 months of cycling 100 or 150 kilometers a day, which is really physically excruciating as well. But this kind of, as it's a constant cycle, it gives you this kind of serotonin boost. So it was just like feeling alive at every moment. And that was my career up until COVID. So I was supposed to go to Japan and Korea in 2020. And as we all know, things have shifted regarding traveling, which left me in my base, Istanbul, where I'm from. And I had the opportunity to reconnect with things that were of my curiosity, like cognitive science and interactive arts. I already kind of specialized or had interest in creative coding during my bachelor's as well, but that kind of 1 year or 9 months window got me the opportunity to explore cognitive science and looking into tech. And eventually I landed into a program in Barcelona called Interactive Systems and Cognitive Systems and Interactive Media. So this kind of like love child of cognitive science and arts. And from there, now I am in the process of like wrapping up or not of my PhD. If anyone who's listening is doing a PhD, you know that it's just like sort of giving birth. So I'm in my PhD where I work in the Institute of Neuroscience in the University of Barcelona.
Wow.
And yeah, but what we do, especially in my case, my project is about the case where we have social media. We have many apps and platforms where we can have interactions, but in the most part, it's asynchronous. Someone leaves a comment, posts a photo or video. There are live streams, but it's not so widespread. So in a future scenario where we have synchronous embodied communication where we have avatars roaming around. And if we think of the context of bullying or harassment, so if someone leaves a bad comment on your profile, you read it and it's textual or maybe audiovisual, depending on the context, but it won't affect you as much if there were to be a representation, a bodily representation coming up to your face and saying, you're ugly, you're stupid, and especially in the context of like an adolescent. So my research is basically trying to see if we can come up with a artificial intelligence paradigm that can predict these occurrences before it actually escalates. So kind of like preventing conflict so that we can actually promote and cultivate a socially harmonious environment.
Amazing, amazing. Wow. So just in that short space of time, you kind of explained how you went from one extreme to another extreme. And I guess we'll touch on where you started a little bit later, because actually where you've ended is quite interesting. Just talk to us about the motivations for that. I mean, it sounds like you have a desire to, I guess, be useful with regards to this research, but what led you to that? Why that specific aspect of I guess human behavior on the internet?
I think so I am fascinated by the idea that we exist in this materiality, this kind of tangible body with this crazy complex system that we call being a human, right? And I think like I moved through various disciplines. I would have never imagined if you were to ask me years ago that you're going to be in Institute of Neurosciences. You have kidding me. But then I realized, I think for me, disciplines are just like different languages we use to describe the same complexity of being human in this mediated world. So anyone that is working in emerging tech or social sciences, or even anything that is like doing stuff with clay, anything that is tangible, it's there's no single tool that can fully express what it means to think and feel and remember. So I think for me, this drive came from the human experience and in the hopes of like making it a good one, because there are horror stories, there are inspirational stories, and I think overall having being present in this kind of industry and world where sometimes profit and sort of gluttony can drive certain things that may not be helpful for the society itself.
Yeah.
It's always nice to have kind of like a step back and then be like, okay, let's question what is social interactions. Let's question what is the things that we do in day-to-day life, and what it like be the version of it if it were to be completely in a digital realm. So it's like one word I would just kind of reduce it or boil it down to is pure curiosity.
And so let's talk about where this research is taking you. So you touched on how there is a kind of poisonous element within society, particularly with how people communicate online. And I'm sure there's lots of discussions about that everywhere. Where is the positivity from this research that you're doing? Do you see hope at the end of this cycle?
I do. I think there are many ways. For example, when we think of immersive technologies, there is this framing that we say that it's kind of like escapism, right? It's this kind of idea that we have one reality, and then whoever that spends time in these worlds are basically avoiding their real life. And I think there's, of course, like everything with moderation, but these technologies pretty much with anything, any basic need, including like food, like you can kind of sustain yourself and then have a delightful, healthy life, and then you can kind of overdo it and then lead to diabetes or being overweight. So it's similar to this kind of analogy. And I think like immersive technologies allows us to kind of almost rehearse reality or kind of like think of alternatives that are better, because for example, in the lab that I am part of, this is not particularly my research, but we work a lot with, for example, people who have agoraphobia, people who are afraid of going outside of their homes, which one way of treating it is putting on the VR headset and then slowly part of like an exposure therapy, letting them go outside gradually so that this controlled version of it allows them to actually go over their fears and eventually be part of the society instead of being kind of enclosed in their homes. Or there are ones that are about, for example, fear of public speaking. Actually, I use that quite a lot. It's a great tool because you start talking with one individual and gradually one becomes 5, becomes 10, becomes 100. So by the time you realize you're actually in front of a crowd, you're giving your speech. So it's these kind of tools that really allows you to accomplish things that are maybe logistically, maybe financially, maybe realistically not so feasible. But as you can bend time and space in these technologies, I think that's kind of like the sweet spot that really improves or gives me hope in the future.
Let's talk about some of these projects that you just touched on. At what stage are they at now? Are these projects that are fully mature and people are using them, or are they still in research stages at the moment? Or are they literally at the beginning, you're still designing them and still exploring them? Talk to us about that.
So some of them are experimental paradigms that have the experiment was conducted and the paper was published. And even I think for the case of the public speaking one, you can already find some applications in like app stores, whichever headset that you're using. So you can like start using it right away. Some of them we have it, for example, my project itself, it's when in the last 10 to 15 years, the paradigm has shifted, in my opinion. Before, research was leading technology, and then it was kind of like research before it was deployed to the crowds. And I think eventually we came to a point where the crowds have become the experiment itself. So like the technology is being deployed without necessarily testing if it's actually served the purpose that the designers or the engineers have intended to. So some of them, for example, the idea of embodied, connected social world, you might use the word that is the most common, metaverse, but I refrain from using it because it doesn't necessarily have to be. But that's not there yet. And there are many reasons for it. There are hardware reasons, technical reasons. It's I love what I do, but you wouldn't see me wearing a headset for more than an hour, maybe daily, because ergonomically, you're wearing a brick on your head. It's like it's not comfortable. It's not well kind of adjusted, and it's like a screen in front of your face. I don't like the idea, or I don't believe that. Like, I love the reality. I love this setup. I'm talking to you while I can look outside through the window. A little sparrow just flew by. So I do enjoy this a lot. But I would go to these worlds for the fact that I can do things that I cannot maybe do in the reality, or be someone that I can't be like in the real life that we have. So it's really about like what keeps me curious is not just what technology can do, but what kinds of selves it allows us to become, what kind of like expansion of being it allows us to be.
Amazing. And so, I mean, that's one of the disciplines you're working with. You're also working with some other technologies as well. Let's talk about them. You're doing some stuff with artificial intelligence. Is that right?
Yeah, so like the reason why I met Natalia in the first place was I have an artistic career as well, where I look into immersive installations and this kind of questioning the idea of agency. So what does it feel, or why do we think that we are who we are? Is it just because of the way that we are contained in our bodies? Can we have distributed consciousness, etc.? So one of the projects we did, which I collaborated with Soliman Lopez, an artist that Natalia works with, was an installation that was called Common AI Verse. So it derived from the idea that I think lately we have this tendency to have emotion recognition, which has become quite a kind of big tool when it comes to therapy, with like online therapy or AI chatbot assisted therapy, or even many other technologies regarding like consumer products. that is only reduced to the face. So it's looking into the facial features and what kind of emotions that it shares. But the problem with that is the data sets that these models have trained on are mainly kind of Eurocentric or Western or really kind of cultures that are where these technologies are prominently kind of being developed in. But then this is deployed in the whole world. And it's also a reduction of the human experience because we all know that when you feel an emotion, it's not only the face, like the feeling of your stomach, like the butterflies, or just kind of like your body becoming tense. Like emotions are bodily experiences.
Mm.
So and on top of that, we don't exist in a vacuum. We are not in a bubble. We live in a society, and our emotions are dependent on the people around us. So we created this installation where it was kind of like a room, and the installation activated itself only if there was more than one people. So it was like the argument that we had regarding you can't experience this alone. This should be a shared experience. And we had an AI agent where the people, like the visitors, first trained the agent from scratch on how they express their emotions via like their bodies. So the agent would prompt like, could you teach me how you move your body when you're feeling sad, or when you're feeling angry, or when you're feeling stressed, or any kind of emotion valence scale, let's say. And the agent would look at it in the individual scale, but at the same time in like the completeness, like the proximity of the individuals, depending on the emotions or the synchronicity. So this emergent representation of emotions that you'd see in a group. And after the training, there would be kind of like a free exploration stage where we kind of close it off with this like shimmery curtains because of people maybe not wanting to move their body as freely if they knew that they were being watched. So
Mm.
it was kind of intimate space where they could just move their bodies, and there was real-time audio being generated through their movement as well. And after all that, we had this kind of online Web3 application where it was a constellation of all the interactions, all these intimate processes that took place that had this almost like a galaxy. So the gravitational pull was towards like how synchronous the groups were, or how exploratory, like the range of motion that they had. So you would kind of leave the space and you would see this kind of visualization of the whole 15-minute interaction that you just had, and it will be just like a little planet in this world of emotion sharing interactions.
Wow. I mean, that's super fascinating. Was the outcome what you expected? Like, it sounds like you had a vision and you delivered on that vision. Did it change as you were developing it, as you were designing it and deploying it?
It did indeed, because there were many aspects. First thing is, everybody likes shiny stuff, right? So we were just like putting so many visuals around, and you soon realize it distracts people. Like people end up watching the visuals that are taking place around them instead of really focusing on what they're doing or what's happening with the people around them. So we
Mm.
kind of dimmed it into more kind of like lasers that kind of shifted through the space, gave them more kind of almost like Mission Impossible-ish, because there was a bit of smoke as well, and it had really fun visual to it. And then this was part of exhibition in CCCB, which is a center in Barcelona, a contemporary arts center. And the exhibition was on AI. The half of it came from Barbican,
Oh,
actually.
wow.
And it stayed for good like 6 or 8 months. I'm not sure, not to kind of be mistaken, but it was long enough time, and it had a lot of visits, and we were able to see the shift of change, like, because I think it's my kind of hypothesis. I'm not sure, but I think some people revisited it because it was like gradually through the time you could really see this kind of like synchronicity increasing. People almost maybe generating or their own kind of choreography throughout the space. And
Wow.
people who were there, like the people who work in the exhibition, noted that there were many people who would go there alone and then they would just like look around and then approach someone and be like, hey, I want to try this, would you join me? So it actually fostered interactions among strangers as well, which is such a delight to hear.
It sounds amazing. I really love to check that out. That's a project that was successful. You learned a lot from it. What are you working on at the moment, or what is live at the moment that you can discuss with us right now?
So right now I'm in San Francisco. I arrived maybe 4 days ago,
Wow.
and I will do a research stay here in Autodesk on computational creativity. So this is gonna be a research stay for like around 4 to 5 months, and it's the idea of how AI tools are now impacting this idea of creativity. It's because we have from diffusion models to generative models to multimodal AI that is just like scattered around us, which is great, right? It's nice because it's giving us that space of exploring things that we didn't have the chance before. But I I kind of see AI or any kind of like this dyadic conversational AI interaction you have when you're generating research ideas or art projects. It's almost like you are in a group project and there's someone that is really talkative, someone that is really dominant. And although you are sort of directing the conversation because you're asking the questions, you're getting the input, it almost kind of dominates the whole process. And
Mm.
maybe you had the chance or the will to explore your own creative path, but as it kind of like facilitates it so much, it makes it so much easier. You get kind of lazy about it. You take the first few, or maybe like, I don't know, the early iterations instead of kind of really taking it deep down into what you would have discovered in this process. So what I'm looking into right now is how can we have it in a way that like the roles that we have designated into this kind of conversational way, if we were to have it in a more tangible way or embodied way. So instead of communicating our creative desires via natural language, which in itself can be complicated, can we use other tools such as voice, such as sound, such as haptics in order to kind of explore cross-disciplinary creative approaches? And I think there's this idea of AI replacing human creativity, and I don't really buy into this. I do understand that there's so many videos, songs, or creative outputs that are coming that is made with AI. But I think it took us like maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks to kind of get bored of that aesthetic or kind of like spot it when it's there. I think it's more kind of relevant to see what it reveals about the structure and the limits of
Mm.
our own creativity. Where does it stop or where does it kind of reflourish?
Yeah, you touched on something very a very hot topic at the moment within the creative space specifically. There are a lot of people that initially hate what artificial intelligence is doing to the creative processes or process at the moment. What do you think is the solution? Because the reality is this technology is here. So many people are using it. It's here to stay. How do we change the perspective so that it highlights where these technologies can help us, I guess?
That's a tricky question. That's the that's the question that I will hopefully explore in the coming months, even in more depth and breadth. But um, I think uh, the overall idea of AI becoming this kind of overpowering or creativity killing tool, um, I do believe to some extent that it's a tool that has the same pattern that we have observed with when first the camera arrived and photography arrived, and like this backlash from the painters, and how like the painting has then had flourished into taking from like not staying in realism or classicism, but then going to abstract various fields and various kind of like genres and waves of like surrealism, cubism, etc. So um when it comes to creativity and AI as well, I think that's also a tool that kind of will turn things around, and it will not be the most pleasant thing, most probably, because it's a shift. And I think we, as species, are kind of, we love habits, we love regularity, and we don't like big
Mm.
changes. And I think this is also going to be kind of like an uncomfortable process. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that, oh yeah, let's unleash this and let's see what happens. I think regulation is necessary, above all, acknowledging the fact that these tools are trained on really existing artwork of artists, and sometimes these artworks are pulled from websites or archives without permission. And I think that's kind of like the tricky part. It's the part where you cannot really justify the progress or this kind of like profit, knowing that you actually have not paid your dues to people that deserve to be paid, or people who actually are the basis of whatever tool that you have created.
Mm.
That being said, I was recently in a conference in Yokohama, Japan, called KAI, so Human Computer Interaction, and there were many kind of sessions, right? There was one session that was called LWM, so large whatever model. So because we have LLMs, LVMs for visuals, etc. So like whatever, just like it's almost kind of a Powerpuff Girl potion, right? Throw everything in and let's see what comes out. And it's it's this constant rhetoric of kind of over optimism that we have to avoid. And I, regarding what I do in my PhD as well, it's not necessarily linked with creativity, but I think it walks in the same realm of certain regulations are necessary, certain ways of kind of having a critical thinking in every step that we have. And there, I think art and science are kind of interconnected, because sometimes in my day-to-day life as well, I use art to test a scientific question, and
Mm.
sometimes I use science to sort of like complicate an artistic assumption. So I think this way of blurring the lines between what is creativity and what is scientific practice, what is doing research and what is actually using research as an expression or an analogy of human creativity, is the thing that will allow us to not fall into this kind of pessimistic narrative of, oh no, we're just like, we're doomed, and like the creativity is dead and AI is going to replace us.
I think it's natural to feel like we're doomed, but you're right. We have to have critical thinking in everything we do as creatives or just as anyone. You know, if you're, whatever your adventure is, you need to kind of question your path or the path that's in front of you and where that will lead you, because questioning it will ensure that you'll have a better experience. This is heavy. This is a deep conversation. I like it. You talked about some of the projects you're working on, one of the projects you're working on at the moment. Let's talk about, you know, where you see the challenges are. I mean, you touched on one of them just now. Where do you feel we as humans are going to have to think about how we utilize these technologies as we move forward into this new era?
I think one thing that really makes it difficult to predict these kind of stuff is the speed that it has gotten into. I
Mm.
think anyone that is I don't know, dancing around this world of AI or emerging tech knows that there's a constant feeling of FOMO, constant feeling of like, oh no, there's a new model that came out. Oh no, there's a new tool that came out. So just I think in the last few weeks, it has been this thing called MCP. So the idea, it's a protocol where instead of having kind of a conversation with AI, you give basically full access to take action upon what you're doing. So this can be, for example, deploying an agent where it's linked with Blender, which is a 3D design tool that
Mm.
can design a 3D model just in front of your eyes using Python, instead of like you basically using basic shapes, extruding faces, or just modeling a 3D object like a clay.
Yep.
You do it using code, and this all of a sudden unleashes a new potential of certain things that are being automated, certain things that are being kind of like taken away. And I I think one one key thing that we have to kind of look into or sometimes dismiss in these general kind of conversations is that the idea is that like it buys us time, right? It's just like when you automate things with AI, yes, you have more time for yourself. But like, how do we use? Do you get that feeling that like now that you use AI in, for example, creating documents or writing emails, you objectively save time, but what do you do with that time? Have you
Yes.
found yourself being like, oh wow, I have so much free time now, I'm just gonna, I don't know, cook for longer, lay down, read? That doesn't happen, right? We have
No.
time per se, but it didn't actually kind of drastically like elevated our life quality. So I think one thing that we have to kind of accept is that it is nice to have these tools. They are actually allowing, like, just I use it a lot for kind of making sure that the way that I write emails are the way that I intend to. Like, English is not my first language. I know that I've been learning it and I've been kind of like speaking it for a good chunk of my life, but I think there are these nuances that sometimes kind of like it gets lost because of this translation process that happens in my head. So using these tools to kind of make sure that what I'm trying to convey is actually what is happening is a nice kind of like fact check situation. But then more and more I realize I forget how to write emails. So
Yeah.
so it's this kind of fundamental thing that we have to understand, that facilitating things, because learning is a full body experience. Learning is not only just kind of like reading stuff. Reading is the most passive way that one can kind of try to acquire knowledge or skills or expertise. So as we kind of narrow things down to natural language now, I think we are more and more losing our capacity to have the building blocks, the basics of any kind of skills. Like, we can do really advanced stuff so easily, but then if we were to try to replicate it in a similar but slightly different context, that Jenga tower falls because we don't know the base and how that functions. And I think with these tools, there is the like the tricky part, like the danger of this false assumption or bias, that thinking that you know things,
Mm.
but you actually
Yep.
don't.
Yep.
And it's so hard to detect in oneself because it's a narrative that we constantly build, right? We think that we now are, I don't know, proficient in certain tools that we use and incorporate in our lives. But it's funny how just I think 3 weeks ago there was a electricity like shortage, just like a grid that went off in Spain. I don't know if you heard.
Yeah.
I wasn't there, but my flatmate was, and it was like the way he describes it is, of course, everyone had this sense of, wow, everything depends on electricity, everything depends on internet. It's just like this moment that like things go kind of like crazy. It's you realize the vulnerability you have, and I don't think we have to go that far to realize our vulnerability. I think if we were to have the servers of ChatGPT down for a week, I would expect a certain amount of chaos for sure. For sure.
Wow. Amazing. That is deep. And I'm sure people listening to that will get so much from it. It's brilliant. I'm so glad we're having this conversation. I have to send Natalia some flowers because I feel like this is it's really great. So you're in San Francisco at the moment
More or less in 5 months, let's say.
and you're based in Barcelona. Let's talk about where you're from. So you're originally from Turkey?
Yes, I'm originally from Istanbul.
Istanbul. So tell us about that. You've come from there. I'm assuming you moved to Barcelona because of this new
Masters.
the education adventure that you're on at the moment. I'm sure Istanbul is still home, but do you still operate in that territory? And also, what are the differences between Istanbul and Barcelona?
Um, it's Istanbul is a kind of like mystical place for me because like the first ever VR art project that I did was actually in Sonar Istanbul. Like, some people know, some people don't know. Like, Sonar is a festival that originated from Barcelona, this electronic music and technologies
Yep.
festival that is has been kind of like the leading one, along with Tech, which originated from Quebec. These kind of like let's say, two epicenters of arts and science going hand in hand. And Istanbul somehow has these kind of like little corners, little trinkets of really advanced artistic exploration
Right.
and scientific like inquiry, and like in the places that you would least expect. So for me, it's every time I go back to Istanbul, every like, I don't know, random galleries that I end up in, conversations that I take part of, it's this kind of how does like why? Because on surface, you wouldn't say that it's a city or it's a place that like these things are encouraged, because being frank, on a kind of like systematic level, it's either more kind of sadly kind of defunded than funded in the recent years.
Right.
I am a kind of believer of certain constraints actually kind of feeding more the creativity or exploration. It's nothing new. This is not like a new statement. We all know that creative constraints or any kind of limitations that we have pushes us to explore different ways. And I think the systematic kind of limitation that has been occurring for the good part of the 21st century, in the case of Istanbul and Turkey, have really made it so that a certain kind of community and has flourished that is really kind of coming up with the craziest and like the most innovative and creative projects that you kind of see around. So I I still have contacts back in Istanbul. Home, it's something that we talked recently with my friends as well. I think home is this body. So at some point, when you become such in this kind of like nomadic way of living, home is where you breathe and where you kind of exist in this skin shelf, let's say. So that's home, because the rest is kind of like you can rebuild, but what you can't rebuild is the community. And I think wherever I go, wherever I end up in, the first thing that I seek is people that are like-minded or not, if you want to challenge your kind of own beliefs and biases, that can kind of cultivate you, because there's no way or there's no fun in doing things alone. I think the more the merrier, genuinely, the way that you kind of can kind of send ideas across the room, and it's just like this electric way of thinking of things or creating things. So this is kind of maybe diverged from the question that you asked, but
No, it's a very, very, very beautiful and poignant answer. There's a generation of people that are really struggling with not just being creative, but also with their mental health, because they haven't cultivated a community around them. And as you say, surround themselves with people who not only are like-minded, but also challenge their perspective so that they can converse and have discussions and stuff, which leads me to my next question. A lot of the things that you work on are very specific to the human mind from a creative perspective using technology. I'm sure at times some of the challenges that you've faced through working on these projects have probably tested you, tested your soul, your mind. How do you look after your mental health?
oh, that's a really important and good question. It's for me, it has the core thing has always been moving my body. I really do believe in like neurotransmitters and serotonin, and the way like I grew up doing sports as well. I used to do volleyball, and then cycling became a part of it. And I think there is some like a little simple hack that is, the moment you feel down, however the weather is outside, if you go for a walk, things get better. Because I think being stationary in an enclosed space really is challenging for you, because it's a good metaphor of how your mind feels as well. So you taking yourself outside is something that like a small act that can not fail in my opinion. But
Mm.
on top of that, it's journaling. It's as simple as that. Like I finish notebooks every kind of like 3 to 4 months. I do believe that things that are not necessarily linked might seem as if they are connected in your head, and that kind of creates this false narrative in the cases of this going to a rather bad or kind of like lack of self-compassion way. I think writing it down and externalizing is a great way to genuinely realize that things that seem to have rooted from you, or things that seem to have kind of accumulated because of um, uh, things that are happening in completely isolated and non-related ways. If you see it on a paper, you go, oh, like I actually has nothing to do with it. These are kind of like separate things, and I don't have to kind of either I don't know, punish myself or assume things or kind of make it hard for myself. So for me, those two have been a practice that I have incorporated in my daily routine for the last, I would say, 7, 8 years now, and have worked for me. I just discovered, thanks to a friend, another app. I don't know if I can say the name or not. It's called, it's based on it's non-profit, so it's like works with donations. It's called How We Feel, and it's this kind of like daily logging of emotions in this kind of huge scale. And it is, the way it works is that you can actually kind of go back and realize what has occurred during the day that made you feel the way that it feels. So it's kind of like cumulative self-reflection. Because sometimes we start a week great and then things go kind of like sideways, and then you assume that it was like this for some time, but it is not. It's like life happens, you know? So I think it's also like a nice tool to kind of remind yourself of having self-compassion and patience with yourself.
I really appreciate your openness and honesty about that. We in this industry, sometimes we tend to forget that we have to look after ourselves when we're working on these fantastic things, you know, these passions that we love. But just keeping that eye on yourself can really ensure that ultimately the fruit that is born is not destroying you, if that makes sense. So it's great. Thanks so much for sharing that. Just going back to movement though. So let's roll back, because you mentioned this at the beginning, and I just, when you threw it in there, I was like, what? So let's talk about it. So you used to be a professional cyclist, or you were a professional cyclist, or talk to us about that.
So that I I still have, like, whenever I tell the story, I think the moral always boils down to whatever you think that you cannot do, just give it a try anyways. I was in my second year of uni. I was in Istanbul, and I was doing jobs that I was not necessarily kind of enjoying. I was doing like video documentation of events and stuff like this to pay the bills. And in a random Facebook group for videographers, I found this thing called like the best internship ever. So it was basically this group of cyclists that is kind of organized by a little company in Toronto, based in Toronto, Canada. And the way it works is that like 5, 6 people end up embarking on this journey, and they were looking for a documentary filmmaker to join them. And bear in mind, I had a bike, but the longest distance I did was like maybe 5 kilometers running errands, like getting like bread for my mom and like stuff like this. And flash forward, I found myself in Sahara Desert, like just after leaving Casablanca.
Wow.
And the thing is, these journeys are kind of 3 to 4 months. What happens? Anyone that is young, that is trying to establish a career, don't have the privilege to live their lives, let alone like maybe their family and their kids for 3, 4 months. So of those people, the average age was around 60 or 70. So people were genuinely like pretty far in their lives, and they were absolute legends, because the first day we leave, and after 40 or 50 kilometers in the scorching sun and desert, I kind of like throw my bike to the side. My legs are cramping and I start crying. I'm like, what did I sign up for? Why did I do this to myself? And then in like 5 minutes, Hubert, which is a Quebecois pianist lady that is like the most sweetheart, she passed along, and I think she has mistaken my tears for sweat, because she was like, "Salut, Esen," like, "Hi," and then just like cycled away. I was like looking at her. But in that moment, I realized if she can do it, and I did this when I was like 22 years old, so she was like already like 66, 67. She has three times
Wow.
my age, and she can do this easily with a smile on her face. So realistically, there's no way that I cannot not do this. So it's that moment that I realize it's the mind that you have to convince above all. They're like, our body is capable of many things. I think I don't mean it into kind of like, yeah, push your body, do triathlons. No, but there are moments that we kind of bail on things because of this feeling of unpleasantness or feeling
Mm.
of just like, oh no, it's not going well. But sometimes when you kind of step over that step, that moment of inconvenience or unpleasantness, that's where kind of progress happens. That's where you
Yeah.
start learning. And I hopped on my bike because like, what am I gonna do? Like put it on a camel and cross the desert? There's no way. So I just like hopped on it and I made it to the camp. And from that day on, I think that kind of really changed me in a way, both in kind of the way that I looked into kind of endurance sports or overall moving my body, and also any kind of challenges in a creative or professional sense. It's that kind of level of resilience that can kind of actually cultivate like a good hardship and good kind of discipline and ethics regarding what you do in life.
Amazing. How long did you do that for before COVID hit?
I did that for 2.5 years. So I did one from Barcelona to Lisbon.
Wow.
Another one that I did was from Morocco to Ghana. And then the last one I did was from Taiwan to Singapore. So like circling around the island and then flying to China and all the way to like Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand as well. So it was delightful. It was a whole process. One thing that I would say is that I think um it's a great experience because you meet so many people, but there was something
Mm.
kind of like not, I wouldn't use the word sad, but kind of, I don't know, the fact that you meet so many people, you kind of know deep down that the probability of you meeting them again is really low. So
Yeah.
it's this kind of like connections that you make, which is really, really kind of I don't know, expanding your sense of self. But then it creates this kind of moment of being in between two worlds, because then you go back home, whatever that is for you, and things have changed there as well. So you feel a bit disconnected there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then you go and meet people. So it put me in this mental state where I realized that like the community, because that was a moment that I felt like the most. I had so many people around me, but there was a certain solitude that came with it because communities, friendships, they require effort and dedication and care, and that sustains. That has to be sustained through time. So I think that moment, like COVID, did me a favor that relocated me to Barcelona. That became my home for 5 years, where I kind of created my community and friends around, because meeting people is nice, but stimulation is not equal to growth or kind of co-creation, let's say.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful, and I totally get that. I love to travel, and I love to be places and meet people. But you're right; those moments take you away from what's happening somewhere else, or where you're from, or whatever. But also, as you say, when you get to the end of that moment, you're like, that's kind of the end of our connection. I mean, we will always have a connection, but we split that connection. You go in one direction, I go another direction. Never really thought about that, but it's so interesting to talk about it. Esen, I feel like we can talk forever. I've never actually properly met you, but I feel like we're having a really wonderful, really inspiring conversation. And I'm sure people listening are getting that too. I'm just conscious of time. So these last two questions. First one, this is quite an important one. It sounds like you've done so many great things, but you're still at the beginning of so much adventure as well, which is great. But I'm sure you would like to talk to yourself about this. If you could give yourself some advice, knowing what you know now, if that makes sense, to a new Essen that's coming into this industry, what advice would that be?
Um, that advice will be that sometimes you feel like you're running out of time. Sometimes you feel like you have to kind of push things in the fast, like more kind of get it out of the way. But putting thought and depth into things are, although unpleasant in the moment, are really rewarding at the end. So taking your times with things, I think patience is something that I had to learn along the way, and I hoped, or I wish that people who are listening, and my young self as well, could like start training that part of self early on, because at the end of the day, there is no thing that you're being late at, because it's your life that you're creating at the moment, at every step of the time. So if you kind of are more conscious about it, that's the best favor that you can do to yourself.
Amazing. Esen, I feel so bad because it's like the end of the chat. We've been like talking for almost an hour. It's been brilliant. There's going to be some people that want to get in contact with you. What's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
They can reach me through my website, where I have all my kind of social media links, as well as my email. It's esenka.co. So ESENKA.co. So they can find me there. If they, yes, shoot an email, or through Instagram or LinkedIn, or whichever platform, Blue Sky, that they prefer, I'd be more than happy.
Amazing. Well, look, Esen, it's been absolutely awesome. Really appreciate you, really value you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Sanj.
Those of you that are listening, again, thanks so much for staying with us on this journey. We've had some really interesting guests and really great conversations. I always feel really inspired at the end of them. I hope you guys are feeling inspired too. If you're sharing this, please use the hashtag, or one word, Tiger Heart Chats. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, please be good.